New York's classic rock, Q1043.
Good morning. You know, everybody has a story. There's a story to everybody's life. And the story is often fascinating. And I have just seen a documentary that is absolutely fascinating. You can see on video on demand. It's called Balloon Man, and it's a story of Bill Costen. And the person who made the documentary is his daughter, Chantal Potter. So I welcome them today. Good morning.
Good
And
morning. Thank you so much for having us.
and hello from Howard Freeman from the New Jersey Festival of Ballooning. Bill, he is a mutual friend.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Isn't that funny? Small world. So here is the bizarre story of Bill Costen's life. He's drafted by the Buffalo Bills during the O.J. Simpson era as a defensive tackle. He's the first to make a touchdown that season. O.J. is the second, and they're tied for touchdowns, and the man is suddenly cut. What does he do? Well, skipping over working for a life insurance company, an insurance company, he becomes the first African-American hot air balloon master pilot. How on earth do you go from football to hot air ballooning, Bill?
Totally unbelievable. I mean, after football, I was always looking for something to replace it because that was a major part of my life. And I was watching a football game in my apartment one day, and the doorbell rang, and it turned out to be my cousin and his boss. And his boss had just driven up the Jersey Turnpike, and he saw a hot air balloon in the parking lot. So he pulled over and checked them out, and they gave him a brochure and everything. He brought it back and he showed it to my cousin. He says, let's start a balloon club. And so they came by the house and they said, let's start a balloon club. I said, what's a balloon? And they showed me a picture of a balloon. I said, well, what does a balloon do? And he answered all the questions and everything. So out of just totally curiosity, I said, okay, I'll check it out. So we 6 of us got together, started a balloon club, and then the rest is history.
Just like that. You know, I often say, I'm not a fatalist, but I think that half of what happens in your life is fate and half is choice. Let me explain just really briefly. Things come into your path and you either choose to take that path or you don't. So that's the choice. The fate is it comes into your path and then comes the choice. But you made a daring choice.
Yeah,
It changed your life
you surely did. You
and
sure-
the life of your family. Chantal, why did you decide to, is this your first film, Chantal?
This is my first feature film. I've done a
Wow.
few shorts before, but this is my first feature.
Okay, so why did you decide to do this about your dad?
I always said that my dad is a storyteller. I say that he started this documentary for me back in the 50s when he took his very first photograph of his grandmother and his little sister. I mean, he grabbed his father's Super 8mm camera, and during the MLK procession after he passed, my dad was right there filming. So, you know, I got a lot of my creativity and just the photojournalism side from my father. But he's a storyteller and he has a good story to tell. And I'm like, no one else is going to tell it. I might as well tell it. And so, you know, we just started filming. I just started traveling with him up and down the East Coast and going to different balloon festivals. And it wasn't a documentary at first, but as time went on, things started to unfold and we started just interviewing friends, family members, other pilots, and it became what it is now.
You kind of grew up hot air ballooning, Chantal, you and your brother, right?
Absolutely. It was our entire childhood, you know. My friends would, you know, they'd always want to come on the festivals, to the different festivals with us. So we would go to Six Flags and there'd be a balloon festival and we get to ride rides and stay in hotels. It was a wonderful childhood. And I think I was 8 months old, my first flight. And my brother, he was 9 days old. And so we grew up ballooning. We've been on hundreds of flights, his most beautiful flight, his scariest flight, we've seen it all.
I have been to the New Jersey Festival of Ballooning. I have been up in a hot air balloon. It was only about a minute before I went up in the balloon with the person who has since become my husband that I suddenly remembered that I was terrified of heights. And for me, I was terrified because you're out I was terrified between the noise with the hot air balloon and then just how can you forget that you have a fear of height? Obviously, the two of you have no fear. But what I also wanted to mention is that in that tent with all the hot air balloon crews, this is basically a white sport. You do not, I didn't see any person of color. You, Bill, was the first. And did that have did you feel uncomfortable in any way early on? Were you welcomed? How was that?
No, I didn't feel uncomfortable at all because basically I came from Omaha, Nebraska. And my whole life up until high school was just my grandmother's house, my father's house, my church, and my home. So getting into high school and then going into the Union Pacific Railroad, I was always around white people. So I used to be a porter on the train in the Union Pacific Railroad, and I used to travel all out to the west, out in Utah and Colorado. So I was always exposed to white people until I got to Atlanta when I went to Morris Brown College. So when I got involved with ballooning, I got involved from a sort of celebrity standpoint. The promoter was using my background as a pro football player with the Buffalo Bills as headliners for a balloon racing circuit. So I got into ballooning, racing balloons amongst some of the most famous balloonists in the country. So I was just always involved in that, and it just didn't bother me at the time. I never did run into any black balloon pilots until maybe 20 years later. And I saw one black balloon pilot at the New Jersey Festival, but he was from Canada.
Oh, wow. Tell us how you met Martin Luther King Jr.
Okay, when I transferred from University of Nebraska to Morris Brown College, my uncle was best friends with Martin Luther King. And he says, you want to go to lunch? I said, yeah. So he took me to lunch with Martin Luther King. And from that luncheon and then the experiences I had at Morris Brown Colleges, I just totally was amazed at Black people. I said, Atlanta was totally Black people and all of them were really friendly. So I had one of the best college careers you could ever have. Meeting new people. I learned about the whole South. I played football. I was a track and field star. I was all American in football. I had my own car back in the 60s. I was one of 4 guys on campus with a car. So I had a wonderful life in the South, and that led to my start collecting Black history collectibles. And that just led into eventually, after I retired, to having a full-time Black history traveling museum.
I'm speaking with Chantal Potter, who has made a movie about her father, Bill Costen. He was a defensive tackle with the Buffalo Bills, scoring the first touchdown of the season. O.J. Simpson scored the second. He was cut and ultimately became the first African-American hot air balloon master pilot. Chantal's movie about her dad, Balloon Man, is available VOD. You got to tell me, what was MLK like? What was it like meeting him? What was he like as a person? Most of us only saw him, as a public figure. We didn't meet him.
Well, when I first met him, I was amazed at how short he was. I mean, he's really short, but he had a powerful voice, and I could just see the love between him and my uncle, and just hearing the different things that I didn't really know that much about him when I met him, because in Omaha, Nebraska, you just didn't get the news. I mean, they only had 3 channels, and my whole um, uh, high school life, I was working. So I was going to school all day and then working 8 hours after school. So I really didn't, I never really saw the 1963 March on Washington. So I didn't know that much about him, but I just saw his majesty, his presence, up front. And then most of the conversation was between him and my uncle, but I was just listening in on it.
How was your uncle friends with him?
My uncle he graduated from Johnson C. Smith in North Carolina, and he built a church in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And while he was at his church, he was experiencing Ku Klux Klan activity. So Martin Luther King came to Rocky Mount, North Carolina, to help him with the Ku Klux Klan situation. And they all had a dinner at one of the people's houses. Right after the dinner, they went right across the street to, I think it was George Washington High School, and Martin Luther King gave a speech, and that was the very first 1963 Martin Luther King speech, maybe 8 months before his famous speech in Washington, D.C. So, and then Martin Luther King's father, he was the reason my uncle came to Atlanta in the first place. And my uncle built a church in Atlanta. So he basically knew all the civil rights leaders. And that's how I learned Black history. I stayed in my uncle and aunt's house for 2 years until I earned a football scholarship. And during those 2 years, my uncle and aunt introduced me to a lot of the civil rights leaders, and then I learned Black history that way, just by living it on campus and learning it from them.
So who do you think had more of an impact on your life? Was it meeting Martin Luther King, or was it your uncle who really changed your life, or was it both?
Without a doubt, my uncle. My uncle was my favorite uncle. I mean, he was a very powerful, he had the loudest laugh you ever want to hear. I mean, just, everybody loved my uncle. And I just respected him because he was from Omaha, Nebraska also. So he went through all the things earlier than what I went through, but definitely my uncle.
Chantal, what have you learned most of life from your dad? What are the life lessons he has taught you?
I think the main lesson that he's taught me is, to be of service to other people, and seeing him, growing up with him, seeing him age, just living through his life. Nothing else matters. What you do for others, how you make other people feel, that's the only thing that really matters. And so that's really stuck with me. And I learned that. I always say that my dad is my hero. But, in doing this project and speaking with other people about him, he's impacted so many other individuals. And he's just an incredible man. And I'm like, I hope one day, I can be as incredible as he is.
And we've only touched the surface of Bill's life. So do check out Balloon Man. It's a movie made by Chantal Potter, and it is about Bill Costen, and you can get it video on demand. I thank you both, and I'll be back in a minute with more Q104.3.
New York's classic rock, Q1043.